performing. And there are not too many musicians that could even come close to portraying such lyrical and beautiful playing as my father. And I think the story needs to be told, you know. He was a complex man, many different personalities. It was complicated at times. It was hard. You know, we grew up with the best and the worst of him, you know. But in terms of his music, no one could touch him. No one could touch him because of the beauty he portrayed. I keep going back to that.
Oh no, it's fine. I mean, you're doing great. Listen, I want to talk. Why do you? I'm not asking you to get inside Burns' head, but I guess again, was Stan slighted because he was considered on the surface a hit maker, a beautiful looking person, and a star, and not really a true jazzer? I mean, why would Burns not pay attention to him when you had guys like Dizzy and Sonny Stitt and Miles and on and on and on?
Well, that's because Burns mostly told the story of the black jazz musician as opposed to the white. There wasn't much time dedicated to any white player in that series, you know. But that's okay. That's what he wanted to do, and so be it. But you have an opportunity to tell the story of a musical giant who was in a league of his own, who brought a lot of joy and a lot of happiness, a lot of tenderness through his playing to make this world a little bit better. And that's what he did.
I was talking to Steve Getz here on the Jake Feinberg Show, and I'm just curious about the misconceptions that or the things that have not been told correctly, or what you think needs to be fleshed out insofar as the film documentary as it relates to his personal life. Because I just talked to Kathy Rich last week, and she relayed a couple of stories, but one about a Thanksgiving dinner where all of a sudden the turkey drumsticks are flying across the table, and her and Bev are running to the room, locking themselves in the room and laughing hysterically at the dysfunction. Can you talk about, I mean, listen, Monica played a huge role. I just interviewed Jeffrey Cohen this weekend. I opened him up big time. You know, Monica played a role, but your dad, can you talk about the mayhem in that house? And if in fact you guys, I mean, Bev said you guys lived in terror. I just want to make sure that's accurate.
Well, we did. It was like I said to you before in our first conversation, it was like growing up in the war zone, because it was just totally unpredictable how he would be from one moment to the next. And
can you give an example?
You know, I think I already have. Last time I gave you some examples of his behavior that was just totally out of line. But
and I guess what I'm getting at is like in a sober state, because I know that he was like that on drugs or not, but like where this 1 minute he's treating you, you know, he's treating you like riches, and then within 3 minutes or a half hour he's totally changed. I mean, can you talk?
Yeah, well, I can talk about that a little bit, because he was definitely bipolar and suffering from depression, untreated. Why do I know that? Because I suffer from bipolar illness and depression. I've had a terrible, terrible time with this illness. But, you know, I'm in recovery because I'm on the right meds and I'm in therapy. But that was part of the reason also. But let's not forget, you know, it wasn't my father per se who created the problem. It was the fact that he had a mental illness and he was chemically dependent on alcohol and drugs. When he came to terms with his alcoholism, that was great. But, you know I got my bipolar illness and depression from the gene from him. I know that. But he just never would admit it. That was part of the problem. And very few people know about that, but that's the truth. I mean, even my stepmother, Monica, would vouch for that.
You mean so he would come to terms with the fact that he would be abusing drugs, but he never wanted to acknowledge that he was bipolar.
That's right. He never did.
Why do you think that? It was a pride thing, or
denial?
Denial.
Just heavy denial.
Heavy denial.
That's also part of what mental illness is. Because, mental illness people, a lot of people with the illness, stop taking their meds, and then they suffer greatly, and other people around them suffer greatly. But that was a good part of what the problem was, I must say.
How did you? I mean, how quickly did you come to terms with your bipolar depression? In terms of, at a certain point, did you start calling him out? I remember you that vivid story you told me about Benson Wong yelling at your dad in the bed, saying, "Take responsibility. You want to keep living. Take responsibility for yourself."
Right.
Did you call him out on that when you were younger, knowing that you also had that trait?
No, I didn't call him out because while he was still alive, I hadn't given much thought to the fact that he was bipolar because I wasn't around him that much in his later years rather. But I wish I had, but I doubt he would have done anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Is there?
He just was real bullheaded about it, and stubborn in his own ways.
How would
he could be very hurtful sometimes. I remember when he played Carnegie Hall for the last time in his life, and we had dinner before the concert, and he said, "Why are you always looking so depressed?" He would say to me. He was kind of putting me down for suffering from the illness, but so be it.
Well, no, it's interesting you say that because that insecurity is like the way he said that to you is where he doesn't want to acknowledge his own bipolar disorder, and yet he's asking you, mystified, why you're down. It's like, Dad, don't you get it? I mean, it's like, Richie Byron.
He used to say to me, "Why are you still on those pills? Aren't they helping? You don't need to take those pills." Just all denial. I have suffered greatly from this illness. In fact, I've just come out of the worst round of the illness for the last 9 months. Just terrible time I went through recently. But I finally found a great psychiatrist, and I'm on the proper dose of medications now, and I'm doing fine. I'm doing good, and I need to stay that way.
Absolutely. Listen, man, you're preaching to the choir here, brother. I mean, I'm this. I found my mix. We're all in the same. Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I feel very connected to this whole project, because I understand that. I never really was in denial.
Right.
Well, I mean, I don't even know what my diagnosis is. It's an anxiety masking depression, but there's a bipolar tendency, and I also see when I read about Stan's behavior and how manic it could be, I see it with my daughters and my wife and the way I handle things sometimes. I sort of just close my eyes and I say, what the heck? 1 minute it's fine, and the next minute I've just gone off the deep end. It's that kind.
Well, how about that?
Well, I mean, I dig. I dig.
Interesting. We have that in common. Okay, well, that's good.
Well, no, there's a lot of overlap, including. How did you know? Stepping back from it, how could you talk about your dad as it relates to other artists, not musicians, but where does he rank when it comes to painters and to, I mean, I guess what I'm looking at here is like, he had these incredible gifts, and how would you rank him, or how would you compare him to painters or artists or other types of performers, as far as the level of where he was at?
Well, he was I call it, he was the Picasso of jazz.
Picasso. Can you explain? Can you explain? Can you flesh that out?
No, because it's Picasso had all those different angular, approach to painting, and there's a certain unpredictability in his painting, and I can make the corresponding notion to my father, who was unpredictable. The only thing that was predictable was, the fact that he had such a gorgeous tone. But he moved, like I've said to you before, from different types of jazz. It was just all music to him, He never made a big deal of it. And his low self-esteem, he didn't think much of himself. And that's because he suffered from the illness of bipolar and depression and alcoholism. Alcoholism, I've had a drink in 18 years, but there's no comparison what kind of pain those two illnesses bring to the forefront. Mental illness is much harder to recover from than alcoholism. I kind of digressed there. I'm sorry.
Oh, I no, you're doing great. I mean, can you talk about a specific time when, Kathy said there was one time where, this is kind of the schizophrenic nature of Shadowbrook, but Stan called Buddy Rich and said, Monica's got a gun, she's going to kill me. And Buddy gets in the car, tells Kathy, come on, let's go. Kathy's like, really? You really want to go up there right now? And they get up there, and Monica answers the door. Everything seems to be totally peaceful. Your dad's in the library, sort of just staring stoically. Monica makes tea. They could never really get her out of the room to talk to Stan about what was going on. But for 3 hours, they didn't talk about the reason why Buddy raced up from New York City. Can you talk about? I just want to paint this picture of people. Listen, there are depressive drunks who sit there and drink, and then they don't talk, but they never become physically abusive or emotionally abusive or physically abusive. But can you talk about something that stands?
First off, I'll say I never heard such a story that Monica had a gun. That's a bunch of bullshit.
Say again.
She never had a gun. She never had a gun. Monica.
Yeah, well, all I can say is that that was the story that Stan called up Buddy.
That's incorrect. You can talk to my sister about that, but Beverly. But no, Monica's as anti-gun as they come. My father was years later when he was living in Malibu. He had a gun, thinking Monica was going to show up on his doorstep one day. And this is after they were divorced, but. We all have our little vignettes. I told you the story of what occurred in the kitchen of the house we lived in previously. You have that one.
Could you actually go through that? Because we have much better sound quality today. I'd love if you could break that down as far as being locked out of the house and then pulling him by the scruff of his neck. That was one of the most powerful things you said.
Yeah, well, I guess I can. It was a time I was about 15 years old, and he was on an alcoholic tear. And I remember he picked up his 4 Grammy Awards and threw them against the wall. And he chased us all out of the house, and, we were all thinking, what's next? And, Monica said to me, Steve, you're the eldest. Why don't you go check on your father? And I very timidly and carefully and quietly moved back into the house, into the kitchen, and my father had his head in the oven, and the gas turned on, and he was trying to commit suicide. And all I could think to do was to shut the gas off and take him by his neck and lay him down on the floor and run like hell, get out of there. My father, as I told you before, had no recollection of that because he was indeed, I believe, he was certainly had to be in a blackout. It was another time when I just come back from college. In fact, I just came back from a semester at the University of Arizona.
In
I
Tucson?
took a
In
semester
Tucson?
there.
In
Yep.
Tucson?
Yeah, I
Wow,
was there for a
unbelievable. That's
semester.
so cool. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. After I left the floating university, my roommate Chuck Green, um, said, well, he talked to me about coming to the University of Colorado. I said, well, I'll give that some thought. But my girlfriend at the time um, uh, was going to the U of A, and I wanted to follow her there, so I did. And I had a semester there. But I just come back from my first year in college, and, we were sitting at the dining room table, and I could tell he was about to. I could just sense that something was really wrong with him. And I went upstairs and I put my headphones on. I was listening to some jazz music, and Monica came running to get me. And my father was in a tear with Monica's brother, Niels Peter. And, Niels Peter, to stop him, hit him in his jaw, almost broke his jaw. And the cops came and, blah, blah, blah. So that's the two vignettes I have.
No, well, I wanted to follow up because that ties into this thing where was it Niles was his name? Niles Peter?
Niels Peter.
Niels Peter.
Nils, yeah.
Because there's a story that he actually physically struck Bev in the face, and it enraged your father, and he didn't know. He was furious about why Bev never told him about this. Was that due to that from that altercation? Because he was going to go after that.
This I don't know. I have no recollection of Niels Peter hitting my sister. I do not know.
Right. Okay. So yeah, because
it's the first I've heard of it.
Yeah. Well,
so.
that was in the Magan book where he struck her with a key in the face, and then Stan was at the Rainbow Room for a gig and just stewing and furious, obviously, because he didn't want his daughter being physically abused by anybody else. And he on the drive home with Monica, he started to sort of go after Bev, and Bev was saying, "Listen, Dad, it's not that big a deal. Let it go. So it's no big deal." He's like, "It is a big deal. I'm going to break this guy's balls next time I see him." But and then he took 10 shots of scotch neat, and then
right.
I mean, do you, Steve, as best you can you identify when it dawned on you that your dad was a pop star, even when you were younger? I mean, Richie Byrack told some great stories about your dad, and like most people, had a really loving feeling to your father. He taught a lot. Your dad taught him a lot. Your dad was also prickly with him too, and it was almost a psychic in some ways. But he said one thing he kept saying is Stan made a boatload of money, like just tons of money. And
he did with the Brazilian stuff, yeah.
So when did it dawn on you? I'm talking like before even as a 10, 11, 12, maybe. What was the first time you realized my dad is a pop star?
Well, I never thought about it in those terms, but I guess I caught wind of that when we moved to these big, houses that we lived in. We were mansions. I never gave it much thought, frankly. I don't know what else I could say about that.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, people would come up to you and start gushing about your father. As a musician, you obviously knew he was gifted, but the fact is, I mean, was there a time when you were overseas or when you were amazed that he had this kind of following? I mean, to me, it was just as a child, it would be kind of awe-inspiring to have somebody who was internationally known for what he was doing. I mean, was there any time you were surprised at the kind of reception that he received?
No, because his reception, whether it be in Brazilian music or jazz, bebop, or cool school, he was always well received. There wasn't a time when he wasn't. But I never thought about, now my father's a pop star. I never thought in those terms.
Right.
Maybe other people did, but we're family members. If you ask Bev about that, I think she'd concur. We never thought about him as a pop star. He was a jazz musician first and foremost, and would always be such.
Absolutely. Do you remember?
But
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. That's all right.
I just was, what I wanted to ask you about. Do you have any recollection or memory of Stan when he went to Johannesburg? You were maybe a teenager, maybe not in college yet, but I'm interested.
I have no recollection of that.
Right, because he went there and he was playing. He was told he could play for mixed audience, and then it was he wasn't, and he wound up at a gymnasium with his quartet. And
yeah, he defied the government, and he went right ahead and did that, and he felt very strongly about that.
Right.
I never had any conversations with my father about it, but we all knew about it, and we're very proud of him.
Did you have a chance to talk to your dad about his upbringing? What I'm getting at here is I really think it's important. He was constantly outside as a boy with Bob, his brother. They were swimming. They were on the streets. He was out all night. And then, he didn't have any formal education as related to music. And then in the 80s, he wound up at the prestigious Stanford University. I mean, did he talk? Yeah. Can you talk about the pride that he had? First of all, what his upbringing was like, and what he would tell you about it, and then ultimately this street scholar got to the point where he was a artist in residence and faculty member at Stanford University. Mm-hmm. I mean, break that down for us.
Well, it was a pretty tough life, him growing up in the Bronx. My grandfather, Alexander, was a printer, and they were just squeaking by every month. And my father was given a saxophone. First it was a bassoon, and then he switched to alto sax, and then from there he went to a tenor. But the only story I can recall is the fact that as much as he liked to play outside with his brother, he also would spend many times practicing for 10 hours a day in the small apartment they lived in. In fact, this is kind of a cute story. The neighbors in the building kept banging on the wall because my father kept playing. It was so cute. Goldie, my grandmother, said, "It's okay, Stan. Play louder. Play louder."
Yeah, people were like, "Tell him, shut that kid up." And she's like, "Keep playing, Stan. Play louder." Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it was awesome.
That's right. Yeah, I think my grandmother, his mother, really instilled on him that this is your ticket out of a mundane, relatively poor life, and that's what he did. He just fell in love with the saxophone, and he was offered a scholarship to Juilliard, but he didn't take it because he was on the road when he was 15 years old with Jack Teagarden, who had to look after him. Truant officers were chasing my father across the country when he was in Teagarden's band to get him back in school, but he didn't do that. But he never graduated high school, and but he was always well read and very intelligent, aware of himself in the world, and it was a nice thing many years later when Stanford asked him to be an artist in residence, and he wasn't a typical academic. He was a jazz musician trying to talk to the students about how you can play jazz and how you can play it well. He was proud of that. Yeah, he felt good about that.
One final question in part 2 here for you, Steve.
Yeah.
Part of the way I'm crafting this script is that the last few years of your dad's life, when he did get sober, he really tried to make amends with as many people as he could that he scarred over the years. So my question is, because he softened a little bit, and I think he understood that he needed to do that. My question is, do you think that's accurate? And if so, are there a couple people, maybe even yourself included, that can attest to this making amends period?
I don't recall him making amends to people. I have to be honest with you.
Okay,
I mean,
because
my
everyone.
father only
Yeah,
did the.
go ahead.
I don't recall that at all. He did the first 3 steps of, in AA, but he never made that inventory in step 4, where you come clean about your behavior and you start the process of making amends. He may have done it, but I just don't recall him doing it.
How do you feel that your relationship with your father? Can you talk about a memory that you had towards the end that was emblematic of your relationship with him at the end of his life?
Well, I spent some time with him in his house in Malibu. He was in a relationship with this gold digger, Samantha Cesenia, who prevented us from coming to the house until 4 days before my father passed on. But we had our quiet moments. I do recall making my amends to him before then. I had done that because I was in the program then. But, he fought. We were all there in his bedroom when he passed away. I'll never forget that as long as I live. I do recall his body was taken to the funeral home, and Bev and I went to the funeral home to make arrangements for his cremation. So we did so, and the next day we went back, and I picked my father up in a little white box, and I had my father in my lap, and I don't know if I told you the story about when we laid him to rest in the ocean. Did I tell you that story?
No, I'd love to hear it.
It's probably the most powerful moment that I ever had with him, or the memory of him, rather. We went out in Shorty Rogers' boat in Marina del Rey, and it was sort of a gray morning, and there was quite a bit of wind, rushing by us, and we had my father's ashes in a saxophone case, and I gave the saxophone case to my son Chris, who was going to pour the ashes into the ocean, and I was standing. This is a very powerful spiritual moment for me. So I said to Chris, "Okay, son, start pouring the ashes into the water." And he opened up the bag and he started to pour. And I was standing in front of the boat with a big photo of my dad, and Herb Albert was there, and Shorty Rogers, members of the family who could be there. And all of a sudden, a gust of wind caught some of the ashes, and they were flung right into my face.
Wow.
In my nostrils, and in my face, and in my eyes, and and I knew exactly what that was. That was my father telling me that he loved me, and essentially saying, go out in the world, son, be a good man, love one woman, be kind to others, and know that I love you. And I got it, but everyone else, when that happened, went kind of shuddered, and they said, "Oh my God, Steve got his father's ashes in his face." But it was a deep spiritual moment for me, because it was my dad giving me his final farewell in a spiritual manner.
I mean, it's
very deep.
Yeah, well, what's deep about it is that you immediately recognized what it was.
Yeah, I did. I did, and I've been trying to write this book of fiction. I mean, of nonfiction, of short stories, and I have a chapter in that where I describe that moment. And it's very powerful, but that was very deep, and how can I ever forget that?
Well, Steve, we've got more to do, and ultimately we're going to be coming back and rehashing this stuff on video, man. Things are really moving along well, and I really appreciate you taking the time, brother.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm here if you need me.
I love you, man. Take care. And listen, I want
Love
to
you
talk.
too.
I want to. I know that you discount him, but you kind of poo pooed it. But if possible, I would love to talk to David.
Well, what you need to do is contact Bev. She's got his email
Okay.
address.
Okay. I just want to make sure that the
And
cats the cat.
that's fine. That's fine. You know, you can talk to him. You know, he's like I told you, between you and me, he's the lost child.
Fast, the might of her domain. You ask me why I love her? I've a
Folks, welcome back inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919.